All right, everyone, it's time to talk about political hypocrisy because I've noticed that there are a lot of people, online commentators, politicians, activists, whatever, who sound very pro-liberty or anti-war or whatever, like they have decent views, but then when they reference groups that they like or figures that they like or within political systems, within their nation, when their people are in power, left, right, or center, they become more authoritarian, like they think that they want to mandate and they want that group to dump on other people. There are very few people, unfortunately, that are consistently against authoritarianism. You got to realize, most people are fundamentally libertarian anyway, except when certain groups, due to football team mentality politics, are in charge. Then all of a sudden a little bit less so. It's like, for instance, when the Republicans are in power, Republicans want to have a mandate and do more things and expand government and use the tools of government to do all sorts of stuff. The second that they're out of power, all of a sudden they start crying like a bunch of libertarians about civil rights abuses or something. This happens with Democrats. And certainly, it definitely happens in geopolitics on a larger scale. Like, there are so many people that are like, well, no more war, Iraq bad, W the warmonger, saying Obama, drone president. But then if Putin bombs a village in the Middle East or something, if his troops in Syria bomb an orphanage or something, they won't talk about it. They won't complain about it. And in fact, they'll tie themselves into a pretzel to justify why it was okay. Well, yeah, the orphans died, but they killed some mujahideen, so it's okay, or something, something like that. They do this with Assad. I'm not naming names, but that's a big lightning rod because that's one of the big flashpoints in the world. They do this with Korea. There will be people who say, well, Western imperialist pigs, warmongers on the Korean peninsula. But then if Kim Jong-un makes a speech suggesting nuclear hellfire and bombing Japan or something, they cheer. They find it to be funny. Partially because it's not a credible threat, I think, but they would enjoy that. They would actually like it, millions dying. This video, by the way, spurred on by last night. I was shitposting because I've got a bunch of leftists riled up, so I figured, strike while the iron is hot. It's funny to me. And they get all messed up, and I was laughing about how it would have been good if Patton had been allowed to go into Russia and end communism instead of being assassinated by the U.S. government because he had political ambitions. By the way, that's a guarantee. He did not organically just crash it. He just crashed his car and died. Mysterious how quickly after the war that happened. Right around the time he was he was making life difficult by being too pro-American, oddly enough, at the time. Like, hey, why are we waiting while, they get better weapons and repair from the war? I thought we were fighting communism. Let's fight communism. And I think that we should have done that. Anyway, I was laughing about that, and I was like, oh, the best time now to stop communism is now. And I used a quote from Dr. Strangelove, because one of these people was calling me a warmonger, and then I used a quote, which is from the president, of course, Pete Sellers, in Dr. Strangelove. You should watch the movie, and I didn't understand that there were people, at least people old enough to use Twitter, who hadn't watched this movie. It's Kubrick's best film. It's like the ultimate cult classic from that period of time. By the way, they had to dub out the line, "You could have a pretty nice day in Dallas." They had to switch it to Vegas. You can actually see the dub in the film. They rushed that out because JFK was shot shortly before the release of the film. They thought it was probably a bad time to make that reference. Just a little bit of movie lore there. I get excited thinking about certain Kubrick films. I think he's a genius. Anyway, I use a quote from this where it said what I'm talking about is not war, it's mass murder. It's sort of a butchered quote there, but you get the reference. And they thought I was being serious and supporting mass murder, and they were very upset about this. But if you look back through the people that are upset at me saying that, if you look back through their tweet history, you'll find them encouraging the death of the Western pigs, nuke Washington, death to the West, hail communism, and stuff like that. Oddly enough, that's sort of the point of the movie I'm referencing at times. The hypocrisy of these two sides, acting like they've been abused by one another and making weird claims and both totally warmongering at all times, but at the same time supposedly trying to work for peace. You're making my point for me, by the way, leftists, when you go crazy over these references. Again, how did you not know that this was a movie quote? Just fucking Google it at that point. Anyway, They're very anti-government, but they're anti-imperialistic, but they don't have any problem with China enslaving half of East Africa. I never hear any of these commentators, by the way, point that out. They never talk about that. They never talk about the U.S. government's terrible because it abuses the environment, but China is great when it blows up entire mountains in order to make tenement halls. And they talk about that. Or, likewise, they can criticize the other side and not the U.S. government. China bad. Look at this wasteful infrastructural project. Oh, pork barrel politics? Oh, cover that up. Put it under the rug. And I hate this hypocrisy. So you'll see people be like, they're a Trump superfan and they won't call him out when he says something that's actually genuinely wrong. I will, but most of them won't. And then you get called a commie by these people, that they'll call you a liberal. I've had so many instances where I've criticized Trump, like on Twitter or whatever, and Trump fans who aren't familiar with my material in an explicit sense, they assume that I'm like voting for Biden or that I'm a Bernie bro. And then likewise, like you call out Biden and say the dude's clearly nuts, he's demented, and they assume that you go around with a MAGA hat or that you're a Nazi or something. It's like this football team mentality politics really doesn't work anyway. It's within party, it's without party, it's international and national, it's local, it's all encompassing. I've come to the conclusion that most people are just hypocrites. They don't have an actual solid philosophical understanding of their own values, and as a result of this, as long as someone is a wordsmith, they can make people do all sorts of crazy shit. That's why I'm glad that I studied linguistic anthropology. It was the most valuable thing I ever studied in college, I think. Which is interesting considering at the time I think I was still pursuing a plant biology degree. By the way, at UVM, plant biology is basically chemistry. I don't understand it. Organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, physics, general chemistry, biochemistry. It's like biochemistry makes sense, but I'm trying to grow plants here. I would like to be, I don't know, a breeder or something. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. Neither does the fact that so many people are ignorant of Kubrick. You've never seen Dr. Strangelove. Quick, jump down Styx's throat. Obviously, he suddenly, after years of consistently opposing every armed conflict that could be imagined, all of a sudden I'm a warmonger. Very funny to me. That's about all. Peace out.